I honestly can't imagine sewing not being a part of my life, and so I'm not surprised that it's something that we do together, and I can see us picking up other things along the way, but I don't think we'll ever stop sewing together. I think it's really become bigger than just sewing.
I'm Sari Mitnick, and this is Seamwork Radio, where we tell stories about the surprising ways that sewing impacts our lives. How did you start sewing? Was it a family tradition, or did someone close to you inspire you to give it a try? Lots of us have been inspired by someone else's skills or hobbies, and sometimes that leads us to try our own hand at something that's fun and creative. Sometimes it sticks, and sometimes it doesn't. We all have this drive to be creative and to express who we are, but sometimes the tricky part is figuring out exactly what your own motivation is. What sparks that fire in you to create? What's your special formula for being creative and staying inspired? We often think that that spark has to come from somewhere deep inside of us, but sometimes what keeps us going is actually our relationship to other people. Sometimes creativity comes from inside and from outside. Today, Taylor's going to introduce us to the Burrell family. In this family, that creative spark lives between them. Here's Taylor.
Sierra, Sansaray, and Patricia are a family, and despite them living in different cities, they are very close-knit. When I first started talking with them, I could tell off the bat how much they enjoyed each other's company. With their excited smiles and quick-witted comments they'd make to one another, FaceTiming and chatting on the phone is not a new activity to them. In fact, Sierra told me that they all communicate at least once a day that way, with sewing being one of the main topics. It didn't always used to be this way, though. Sewing was one of those things that came and went throughout their lives, but it had never been something they had done together, not until recently. The trend started with Patricia when she was a young girl in a very boring home ec class.
In the 7th grade, we had a home ec for the year. So the first half of the year was cooking, the second half of the year was sewing. And I was really excited about it because my older sister had been through it and she became a sewer, and it was just fascinating. But we took a whole semester to make an apron, and I couldn't figure out why in the world would we do this. And you weren't allowed to touch the machine until you could figure out a whole lot of other things and pass tests. And while it turned out nice, I was like, I don't ever want to do that again. It took too long. But luckily, because my mom sewed and my older sister sewed, I was able to gently move back into that space, and I wasn't so turned off by that.
Patricia continued to sew here and there, but high school was when she got more into it, by making her own bell-bottoms, skirts, and tops. Unlike now, when handmade items and clothes are looked at with awe and wonder, and how did you do that? When Patricia was growing up, making your clothes wasn't exactly something to always be proud of.
And back then, folks would say, oh, you made that, didn't you? And that was code for, it looks like you made that, and it doesn't look so hot. But it was great that if somebody said, oh, I like that. Where did you get it? Robert Halls? We're like, no, I made it. It was like, really? So that was, when you got those kind of feedbacks, that made it wonderful.
You could tell that she looked back at her childhood and sewing experience fondly. Through the years, Patricia made things for herself as well as a lot of personal home decor projects. But once she had 3 kids, she ended up making clothes for them as babies and toddlers, which then morphed into sewing custom Halloween costumes, as well as baton costumes for Sansaray and Sierra as they got more serious about the activity.
When Sierra was, I think, about 4 or 5, I wanted to be Miss Thrifty, and so I went to get the Halloween costumes. I couldn't believe they wanted all this money for these ugly things, and they were made out of really cheap stuff that was going to tear, didn't have a back to it. So I decided she was going to be Baby Bop. So I made her Baby Bop costume and used some of the Tyvek that my husband had brought home from DuPont and painted. And Sansaray actually did Baby Bop's head. I can't remember what it was anyway. Baby Bop. What was the other one? What's it called? Barney. Baby Bop. Baby Bop. And the only thing was missing was the headdress piece, and I didn't feel like I could do that, but I did the costume.
Oh, and baton costumes, Mom.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
Yes.
Yeah. Both of the girls twirl baton. it started as a hobby, but it quickly graduated to competition and teams and something that we didn't know existed. And it kind of took over our life for a while. And I never told them how much it cost because they've told me now they would have told us to stop right there. But what would happen would be the costumes when Sierra was young and Sansaray was young. Once again, you could pay a fee and they could make the costume for you. And it was like $150 or something. And I thought, I can do that. I can do that. I even made my own pattern for that. I was like, oh, no, I'm not a sucker for that. And so that's what I ended up doing. And then when they grew, I just made another one.
Fit was important to Patricia. She wanted her daughters to feel comfortable and confident in the costumes that she made for their baton competitions. But as Sansaray and Sierra got older and their bodies started to change, Patricia struggled to get the best fit for some of their garments. So she hired someone to help her out.
As they got adult bodies, I ended up doing mostly the trim, and I found another sewist who could make sure that the elastic fit and they weren't going to have a hip come out or anything like that. Tailored it, and actually she showed me a lot of things about how you can get it to fit.
Getting help from Rose, the woman Patricia hired for fitting, made sewing even more of a mark with the Burrells. Sierra made a comment about how she really started to understand the power of sewing at that time, because her body was changing and needing different attention.
There was this one woman in particular, Rose, who would make my baton costumes and like really make them like custom because like my body just didn't look like a lot of other people's bodies. And my mom would have to like literally sew a bra into the costume. So I feel like I gained a better appreciation. Like I can say now I have a better appreciation of what she did because she was able to make things fit so well with so much movement. Like so much movement. So I feel like, yeah, it was, I think like that might have been a moment where I was like, oh, okay, this is a really important like talent, skill, trade.
Through all the projects that Patricia tackled for her family through sewing, it was a natural activity that Sierra and Sansaray were exposed to at a young age. The ability to make things from nothing into something was a powerful act, and even if they weren't sewing as kids themselves, it was still something they knew existed and made a lasting impression. I think it also helped them feel encouraged to explore, be themselves, and try things that seemed interesting to them. Here is Sansaray reflecting on her childhood.
I feel fortunate because one of the biggest things I think when I think about growing up is that our parents really forged opportunities for us. It was all about supporting what would end up being our identities, like encouraging us to express ourselves, to explore, to try different things in a number of different settings with diverse folks around us. But at the same time, instilling that sort of this commitment to duty and discipline from the standpoint of, we'll sign you up for soccer if you want to, or if you want to do martial arts, but when you sign up, you complete that season, right? Mm-hmm. And then you can decide what you want to do next, but you will complete that season. I mean, barring anyone like attacking us, like, you finished it out. So it also gave us a sense of, I guess, purpose and commitment when we are trying stuff.
I feel good about the fact that whatever we did, because it didn't come with an instruction book, okay, that they were able to explore and try some things. And what makes me feel good about that, too, is I'm a former educator, and I feel like part of becoming who you are is being able to really be a kid and be able to do those kinds of things that bring you joy.
As Patricia was explaining this, I could really start to understand where her daughters get the need to create. It's been ingrained in them since they were kids, if they knew it or not. Because as children, we may not know what we are doing is a quote-unquote creative activity. Creativity isn't something that we learn in a specific lesson that we know how to be creative. It's something we learn over time, through observation and experience, and you don't necessarily have to be good at it right away, or ever. Sierra made a great point that even though we may not be the best at drawing or singing, it doesn't mean that we can't get something out of it.
It's like if you aren't good at this thing, then don't do it. So it was like an extracurricular activity where I was, I was good at times, but not all the time. But it just was like free to, like Sansaray was talking about performing. At an early age, I feel like I started to perform. And so that was my creative outlet for a while.
The extracurricular activities that Sansere and Sierra participated in growing up had major influences on them. In particular, for Sansere, art and performance was a big deal for her. Today, she is an art therapist, but also practices her own art outside of work as well as sews.
One of the first activities I did was ballet. And for some reason, which is completely opposite of who I am today, like I'm almost recklessly fearless and, performing in front of people. But I was so shy to the point where they had like days where the parents could come in the last 30 minutes of dance practice, and I refused to perform if they were there.
And Space Jam, huh?
Oh yeah, my parents allowed me to paint and draw on the walls of my bedroom. Yeah, it was really cool. And do you remember Space Jam?
Absolutely.
Yes. So I depicted the Space Jam characters on the wall in my bedroom, and I could be told nothing after that. Could be told nothing. And then, years later when my dad went to change it, it took like several layers of primer to get through. But yeah, so just in general, a commitment to allowing us and encouraging us to be creative. And I'm grateful for it.
Similar to her mother's experience, Sansere first tried sewing around when she was 8 years old and took a class with a cousin. The class ended up being helpful, but it wasn't something that stuck with her as a continuous hobby. But once she was in college, she joined an African dance group that made their own costumes.
When I really picked it back up again was in undergrad, and I joined an African dance group and quickly learned that we made our costumes. And it was one of those things where if you had they found out you had any ounce of any type of ability to make garments, then you were on that team. So of course I was on that team, and we didn't have patterns either. So we drafted them. And so a lot of like loose fitting pants so that we could move, like large billowy skirts for a couple dances we did, some tops and things. It was interesting to get that start with garment making because we didn't have store-bought patterns. We drafted them. And I don't even think I realized how different that is to approach garment sewing. Because
totally.
Foundationally, so it even supported the way that my brain works anyway. So in terms of garment sewing, again, I think I put it down for some years. And just most recently, maybe in the past, what would you say, 3 or 4 years, Sierra? Sierra jumped in, and I was watching her and got inspired and discovered that since I had been sort of out of the game, there's this whole indie sewing world that is so much more, to me, inviting than the big four pattern world. And no shade, right? Like, I'm not throwing shade at big four companies, but I just feel like there's a different community and it's inviting. I like the social justice sort of approach that indie patterns have. I like taking responsibility for diverse people and bodies and ideas and causes. So when I saw her learning stuff and sharing things back with me, it was instantly contagious. So I jumped back in. And I think I still very much look to her as a guide in this space.
Developing these skills over their lives and being creative was something that each one of the Burrells did a lot, but never as a group, at least not yet. Each one of them were working towards a very powerful hobby that would eventually spread and make an already strong connection even stronger.
Coming up, the youngest member of the family takes on a role she's never really had before, and it brings even more creativity and connection into their lives.
Well, I kind of felt like I was in charge, which is not the case. I was so excited. I was like, wait, you don't know what this is? I get to introduce you to this? It was kind of like I was teaching them, and it was exciting for me because I learn a lot by teaching as well. Because if I can't explain it, I'm like, well, do I really know how to do this? So I feel like I've just been opening things up to them. And I'm like, oh, have you seen this place? Have you tried this? Like, online fabric shopping is an entirely separate hobby. Like, let's dive into it.
If you're enjoying this podcast so far, you might really like joining in at the Seamwork community. In addition to this podcast, every month we create new sewing patterns, a video class, and a monthly digital magazine. When you become a member, you get access to all of that each month, plus you can hang out and talk in our private community forum. We're all really welcoming, and it's a great place to ask questions, post projects, or share your thoughts. Right now, podcast listeners can get a special discount of 50% off the unlimited plan. That gets you access to our full catalog of over 150 patterns, and you can download as many as you want, whenever you want. It's only $90 for a whole year of patterns, plus classes, videos, magazine articles, and access to the private community. Check it out at seamwork.com/go/podcast50 or look for the link in the show notes.
Both Patricia and Sansere sewed as they were children and had utilized the craft on and off throughout their entire lives. But Sierra, the youngest of the family, didn't really get into sewing until well into adulthood. Sewing was just kind of there, but it never really caught her eye in the way that it made her want to try it for herself. Not until she graduated vet school and was in need of a wardrobe refresh.
It was like my first, I'm going to say real job. It was my first job out of school. And I was very used to like living in scrubs or coveralls or whatever we had to wear. And I was entering like a new phase of life. And I remember somehow somewhere on the internet, like I saw Mimi G, and I was like, oh, she makes her clothes. And I was like, that's a thing? People do that? Like, which was really exciting. And she had started the Sew It Academy. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. Let me kind of check this out.
If you don't know Sierra or follow her on Instagram, let me tell you, Sierra loves color and prints. She wants to express her inner joy with her outward appearance. And for her, that's through her wardrobe.
It just makes me so happy because whenever I wear them, I smile and then somebody else smiles and then it's just a great day.
So Sierra was on a mission to figure out how to find the clothes that did that. But being plus-sized, her options were limited. And since sewing had always been something in her life, she figured, why not try it for herself? Her mom did it, her sister did, so why not her?
I was interested in like how I could make that work for me as I started a job and had different things and was quickly running out of options of things to actually wear that were durable but also looked nice. And so when I started learning, I got the basics, like this is a sewing machine and this is how you thread your sewing machine. So like very, very basic intro. I'm sure I did not even learn all of like the terms for things. And when it got to the clothing part, it just didn't gel. I don't know if it was like maybe the style wasn't for me or that like some of the patterns were like big 4 patterns and I like couldn't find them in my size, or if it was just a general fear of sewing. And I'm like, what in the world?
I know many people feel the same way. Sewing was around Sierra her entire life, so why wouldn't she think she'd be able to just jump in and have everything work out perfectly? But there were a few key puzzle pieces missing for her. One being accessibility to her size and things that she wanted to make, but also the spark she gets from community and other people.
It honestly was size most of the time. My body was different then, but still didn't necessarily fit into them.
As time went on, Sierra was relentless and did what she does best, explored and investigated further. Perusing Instagram and Facebook, she discovered Ginny Rushmore's pattern company, Cashmerette. And then, shortly after that, saw the Curvy Sewing Collective. There was this whole community online that celebrated bodies like hers, and after seeing women who were a similar size making their own clothes, something sparked inside of her.
I know one of the first pattern companies I saw was Cashmerette, and then I like saw the Curvy Sewing Collective, and I was like, oh, like they have like a blog and everything, and there's a Facebook group, and then I was like, oh, there's other Facebook groups for this, and there's these things called indie patterns. What is this? I decided to just start trying indie patterns and sewing them and seeing how it happened. And another thing that was integral to me actually trying it and then sharing what I did was the Sew My Style challenge, the sewing challenge. Like, I was like, oh, people are like making things during a specific month and then they're sharing it. And it really helped me feel like I was more part of the sewing community. And so that that kind of just took off from there. And I just kept, I guess I just continued to try things. That's kind of the way that I sew. It's like, oh, that's a really cute thing. Let me try to make that. And then I follow the directions, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So it's kind of like, I kind of went from like an online intro course to jumping into indie sewing patterns to then seeing, oh, there's challenges associated with this and there's other groups. And it just kind of grew organically from there.
Now that Sierra discovered something magical to her, she wanted to spark that creative energy within her sister. She quickly looked to Sansere and told her to check it out.
And then I remember I discovered Indie Patterns, and I was like, Ray, you have to look at this. This is amazing. And she's like, okay, I'll try it.
This was a little different than what Sierra was used to. She was more used to following in Sansere's footsteps since she is 8 years older.
She's 8 years older than me. I feel like we got a lot closer as adults because an 8-year-old and a 16-year-old don't have much in common. But then you hit this milestone and it's like, oh, wait, we're both adults. Like, this is awesome. And I've always been super close to my sister. It's just that we have more in common now. Like, I always wanted to be like her growing up, and it's a whole thing.
This time, though, Sierra was leading and introducing her sister to so many things that Sansere didn't know about. She was on a mission to share as much as she could to get the ones closest to her to come along and join her on her new journey.
Well, I kind of felt like I was in charge, which is not the case. I was so excited. I was like, wait, you don't know what this is? I get to introduce you to this? It was kind of like I was teaching them, and it was exciting for me because I learn a lot by teaching as well. Because if I can't explain it, I'm like, well, do I really know how to do this? So I feel like I've just been opening things up to them, and I'm like, oh, have you seen this place? Have you tried this? Like, online fabric shopping is an entirely separate hobby. Like, let's dive into it.
Being the tight-knit family they are, the discussion and activities that Sansere and Sierra were doing together quickly got communicated to their mom. And it really started to transform the way they bonded with each other. Interestingly enough, Patricia had been talking about getting back into sewing since she retired.
And I'm like, Mom, you really should. Like, just do it. Come on. So we went to the store, we got the fabric, and she did that. And I was also very proud to introduce her to indie sewing patterns as well. Because she made her first indie sewing pattern ever, first PDF pattern, all of that for her 40th wedding anniversary. And it's super adorable. And I was really happy to kind of bring her back into it. So I think ultimately seeing the things that I make and like sharing them with my family has kind of brought them back into it. Because it's, I'm like, now, Mom, things are a little bit different. Like, it doesn't have to be that hard. Like, I remember when I told her about the rotary cutter and it blew her mind. I was like, Mom, rotary cutters are amazing. Let's do this. But also, please lock it when you're not using it because I've cut my hand and it's not fun.
Sewing is an interesting hobby because it's something that most of us typically do alone in our homes by ourselves. It can be isolating. Yes, there is this huge community online that you can participate in, and if you're lucky, you can also participate and connect with others where you live at a fabric or craft store, but you're still doing the activity alone most of the time. The Burrells have taught me that I'm very wrong about that idea, though. Connecting with one another is really what fuels their sewing. The three of them talk literally every day to each other, and sewing is always on the agenda.
We sometimes will FaceTime and sew together. So you see
Nice.
expressions, or we will share progress on certain patterns, and even like fit advice. Like, how does this make my booty look? Like, can you tell me, like, like, I need to take it in here, or, or it's like, no, girl, you need to do that hem before you take pictures. And I'm like, okay, you're right.
Other ways they have bonded and connected, not only with each other, but other sewing communities, is by attending frock tales in different cities and local sewing events, and they have even gone on a few field trips.
Well, something that surprises me with you guys, that they continue to invite me to hang out. Now, we went to frock tales. They said, you got to come. And I was like,
Oh, yeah.
for you all to do? They're like, no, you gotta come. And I was like, but I want you all to have your own space and time. I had the time of my life. I met so many sewers from so many different places, ages, stages, everything that was going on. Folks were getting tattoos. We had some spirited little drinks in the front of the cup.
This is DC Frog Tales.
This is DC Frog Tales. But I was delighted that they say, come do this. And then Sierra, she's like, meet me in Raleigh. I was like, what do you mean, meet you in Raleigh? She goes, you drive down. It's only like 2.5 hours. And Sansa wasn't available for that. I don't know if you were working or what project you were on, Ray. She says, meet me there. We're going to go to Spoonflower. We're going to take this class. We're going to leave. We're going to have a yard.
So
You're going to have a yard of fabric. You can create this. I was like, oh, this is out of my element.
When talking with them, they all sounded spontaneous, excited, and always ready for an adventure around sewing. And it got me thinking how they balance each other out so well. Finding people you can be your 100% self with is really powerful, and these 3 women get to exercise that power every day with each other, all around a hobby they have grown to love very much. Sewing seems to be one of those hobbies that comes and goes with people. I think Patricia's story is really common, and now Sierra's story is becoming more common as well. I asked them if they were surprised that they all ended up sewing together after so many years.
I honestly can't imagine sewing not being a part of my life. And so I'm not surprised that it's something that we do together. And I can see us picking up other things along the way, but I don't think we'll ever stop sewing together. I think it's really become bigger than just sewing.
When I talked to Sierra before we did our official interviews for this podcast, she identified something really cool about the 3 of them. They each have their own parts they play in their sewing circle. Sierra coined herself as the explorer, her sister as the expander, and her mom as someone who is reinvigorated. I really loved this notion that they each help and encourage different parts of their personalities around sewing.
I feel like I'm most likely to go seek something sewing related out. So like out of the 3 of us, I'll be the person who's trying to find the retreat or a new fabric store or a new sewing pattern or even just a new method to do things. I feel like I really like researching things. Don't know what that's about, but I enjoy the whole process. Like I like discovering new things. And so I think when it comes to the 3 of us, that's definitely more my role than anybody else's because I just find myself wanting to do that pretty much every day.
Sansa is the expander of the group because sewing is just another extension of her creativity that she likes to practice.
I will agree with the expander piece because like creative expression is important to me personally, but also like career-wise. And so to me, it's just another avenue. I can expand the scope of my creative practice through expression with what I wear, especially when it comes to like color selection and sort of allows me to expand what it is that is in my repertoire, art-wise.
Patricia, who has had the longest relationship with sewing, has a unique perspective because she's lived through a lot of experiences, and the one she is in now is different, and she's feeling empowered by it.
This is a new season for me. I've been retired for 10 years, and that just happened really quick. And the first part of that, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my time. And then friends would ask me to do this, to do that. Oh, I know you like to do this. And I was going here. And then it was like for a minute, I forgot I was retired. I can do what I want to do. And what I don't want to do, I don't need to do. And so I just turned 65. And while people say, oh, you're over the hill, I remind folks that when you go over the hill and you start going there, you pick up speed. And so I feel like I'm picking up speed now. And I can't say I'm being sassy, but I'm just being more determined about what I want to do. And when I look in the closet, and especially during this pandemic and COVID times, I was like, look at all these clothes. And then I started looking and I said, I think I'm finished wearing these. I look back and pick from 5, 6, even 7, 8, 10 years. And whether I made them or I bought them, because I bought more at that time. Then I was like, it's time for somebody else to wear these, and I'm a plus size woman and they're nice and I don't want to just drop them off at some store. So I've been finding folks and places that can use it. And when I look at that, I'm just like, well, now when I sew, I'm not sewing for work because I don't go out to work and
Mhm.
I still wear clothes. And so I can do
Sometimes.
sometimes. See what my daughters are making and building as a wardrobe, and then they'll say, "Oh, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to make this." I said, "When?" I said, "Tonight." I was like, "Tonight? When are you going to tomorrow?" I was like,
Tomorrow.
and so then I watch them do this, and coats and jackets, and I know, like for instance, Sansa Ray is a Lubach. She can recreate shape and do everything in that dress, and so it's really encouraged me to just say, "I want to make these leggings." Okay. The pool for water aerobics has opened back up. We have to leave without going in the locker room. I need to be able to pull something on. And so I am reinvigorated and I'm encouraged because they do it. They make it seem effortless. But if I call on the phone and say, "What are you guys doing?" "Getting ready to sew." "What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm sewing." I've also learned that, especially Sansa Right, well, they both do. You're going to hear the sewing machine. You're going to hear the pattern that sewing machine is going. And so now I even know the speeds at which they're sewing and who's doing what. So they encourage me with that. And it's like, it's a nice world to be in at this point. I can make things for myself by choice.
Mhm.
There's something real liberating about that, you know?
I can see why Patricia is so inspired to jump in and join the activity. Sierra and Sansaray talk about sewing so deeply and passionately that how could you not want to hop on the machine and sew with your sister and mom over the phone? Just being around another human while they're doing something creative can spark that fire inside of you. Which leads me into another thought. Creativity isn't the only thing that is contagious here. The way you practice being creative can also be influenced by others. People are complex, and even though Sierra was the one who initially labeled everyone with their titles earlier on, she came around in the end identifying everyone being a part of each characteristic, not just one.
I feel like they said it all, but it is very accurate to me. If I look at it, explorer, expander, reinvigorated, it makes sense. And I also can see each of those in each of us. So now that I'm doing this, I've started other creative hobbies. I did some watercolors, and that was really fun. I've been doing different things with bullet journaling,
Mm.
embroidery, knitting when it's not hot outside, or even taking the leap to try other like online software, kind of like with like the Adobe Suite, kind of stepping out into things that I wouldn't have done before, I think, because I feel empowered and because I see Sansa doing it and knowing that
Mhm.
I am no classically trained artist, but neither is Sansa. And she's an artist and an art therapist. And I think I'm reinvigorated when I think about the things that we can now make together. So that has been a really awesome thing about some of these size expansions because there are patterns
Yeah.
now that all three of us can make. And that it makes me so happy. We printed out some patterns the other day and we're going to make some leggings together and I'm so excited. So it's reinvigorating my love for sewing and it continues to be an exploration of all things Sierra. I've learned a lot about myself through sewing and I didn't think that would happen, but it did. So yeah, I kind of think we're all three at the same time, which is interesting because I didn't figure that out until just now.
Sewing is a powerful hobby that can really elevate someone's confidence. It teaches us things that we may not even realize have benefited us or have seen ourselves being better at. For some, it's self-care. For others, it's how they show their love to friends and family. And ultimately, we all end up sewing to serve a need or a want in our lives.
I feel like it also has taught me that you will outgrow things and that's okay. So I have like maybe I have some patterns that used to be my style and they aren't anymore and I don't feel bad about that. Like it's fine. Or maybe I have a piece of fabric and I'm like, actually I don't like this anymore. And it's okay to let that go and let somebody else experience it or maybe it's something they love. It's okay to evolve. Like it's necessary. So I think it's been really empowering to recognize that and to know that that's like a natural part of life. and not to get really hung up on anything too much. It helped me not take myself as seriously.
But it allowed me to say, hey, you know what? This particular thing, this hobby of mine, this lane of creativity, I'm reserving it for people that are in my special circle, right?
Mhm.
So, and that makes it to me even more special. So, to me, boundary setting with keeping something special for yourself, I think, is important. So, it's a delicate balance, right? But I think it's an opportunity to practice that, yeah, and to say no. You're saying like, and which brings up another piece though. I would like to begin to try to teach people to sew more so than like making stuff for folks. It's like the whole give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day.
Mhm.
Teach him how to fish and he'll eat forever. I want people to be able to eat forever because cooking for everyone every day is exhausting. So yeah, boundary setting with sewing.
I can make myself happy. I can do this and I can do it for me. And I think it adds to the things that I can do for myself to make myself how I'm going to spend my time, what I'm going to create. And there's something in this season of life about doing that that feels different than it did before because I know myself better. I can create for myself or my close loved ones, and I can make myself and them happy. And I just think that just transfers to a whole lot of other things. And it also helps you clear the road out, the lane out for stuff that you really don't want to be about the business of, and you don't have to be about the business of. And when you learn that, you can create anything you want to. So I think that's what it's taught me.
Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the Seamwork community, and you can find us at seamwork.com. If you have a story to share, send us an email at podcast@seamwork.com. We'd especially love to hear stories from those whose experiences often get left out of the conversation, whether because of race, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, age, or any other reason. Again, that's podcast@seamwork.com. You can find us on Instagram at Seamwork and Seamwork Video on YouTube. We'd love to invite you to join us at seamwork.com. We have an amazing community there, as well as new sewing patterns and classes each month for members. Podcast listeners can get 50% off our unlimited membership, which gets you unlimited downloads from our library of over 150 wardrobe-building sewing patterns. Just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find that link in the show notes. And if you like this podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or the podcast app of your choice. It really helps other people to find the show so they can hear these stories too. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back with you soon. I'm Sari Mitnick, and this is Seamwork Radio.